Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, in today's video we are going to be talking about best Battlegrounds dual purpose champions, and I have actually doubled the amount of champions that I will include in this list because there are so many champions that I just could not mention. There are obviously several super important things to keep in mind, and as always, the mandatory disclaimer: this list is a mixture of my personal view and opinions with the current game relevance and trends. It obviously depends on which champions we personally prefer, feel more comfortable with. We each have different playstyles, different preferences, different experience based on the level that we play Battlegrounds at. And obviously, it is super important to keep in mind the meta kind of like designations on these champions as well, because a certain set of node combinations can elevate a champion to like one of the MVPs of the meta level. I think here the best example would have been Howard the Duck, a champion that traditionally doesn't really make most Battlegrounds decks, especially at a higher level. But when we were dealing with that armor burn, armor up meta, Howard the Duck was MVP not only for defense but also for offense, because if opponent didn't have a champion that immediately gets rid of his armor ups, they're dead. And likewise, Howard the Duck was one of the best domino counters and one of the best offensive champions in that meta period because he had access to super good armor break. So there will be instances often when a specific node combination just makes a defender absolutely OP, or an attacker, or both. Like recently we had Terex, who's having infinite rock field, therefore has very few counters. Prior to that we had Ronan, who could infinitely stunlock opponents, and even a 5-star Ronan was the biggest menace. So there are always factors based on metas and things like that. And yeah, again, you will have your opinion, I will have mine. As long as we can remain civil and respectful, there is absolutely nothing wrong with having a debate about it. That said, do not forget that I am organizing a $300 giveaway for July the 4th offers. Only thing you have to do in order to enter is duel me in-game, grab a screenshot, and submit that screenshot in the link that you will find in the video description below. You have until July the 2nd to enter. The winners will be posted on July the 4th. We are going to give away $100 to 3 lucky winners. So all of that being said, let's start and get into it. So I do not want to spend too much time because I know for a fact this video is going to be super long, but we're going to start with spot number 20, and that's going to be one of the newer champions. And I will kind of explain why he's in spot number 20, but also why he does make the list, because Spider-Man Supreme is definitely capable of absolutely wrecking fools on defense, and he is much better attacker than a lot of people realize. I do highly suggest watching some of Fintech's matches or live streams where he performs with Spider-Man Supreme. I think Bittersteel also does some interesting and cool things with him, because he is very capable attacker against a lot of matchups that you would not necessarily think about. For instance, I have seen him deal with Rintra. Wasn't the fastest, but he still finished the fight. I have seen him do very well against stuff like Warlock or Nimrod, and then most importantly, he's a very solid domino counter if you are playing him properly, because his blessings are not affected by ability accuracy, therefore he rarely takes much of crit fail damage. But obviously the kind of tricky part with him is, let's face it, he's not the top attacker. When you get him in a right matchup, he's going to be great, but ultimately he's not like the fastest damage dealing champion. He doesn't typically in a straight race stands up to something like Hitmonkey or Hulkling or whatever. He can be quite fast though, but again, that has to be in right set of circumstances. The other thing is obviously his defensive capabilities. And he can be a nightmare in specific metas. In a vanilla circumstance, he is at the moment viewed much scarier in defense than he will be 6 months from now. I can guarantee you that. As soon as more and more people realize that you can just parry him and do 4 light hits, or parry and heavy infinitely, and you don't have anything to worry about. Alternatively, if you use buff immune champion, you can just play as normal and he will do absolutely nothing to you. Then you will understand that his small health pool will make it very quick to dispose of him. He's a type of champion who will either do very well on defense and KO you, or deal a lot of damage to you, or he's gonna go down in like 25 seconds. He's very inconsistent depending who you go up against. And the more time passes, the more people will realize how to fight against this guy. It is a different question in metas where, he's, for instance, stun immune. That would make him a lot harder to fight against him, and you would need a designated counter. But in vast majority of the metas, it's quite literally just as simple as parry heavy or parry for light hits, and you will be perfectly fine. But as of right now, he's still very capable champion, both offensively and defensively, and I did figure it's worth pointing him out. Moving on to spot number 19, I am going to give that to Zurafa's BFF, and that is the Witcher dude. So, Null, and the best thing about Null is that he synergizes extremely well with Inequity Mastery, placing a ton of debos on you, thus effectively significantly extending his health pool via the decreased damage that you're capable of doing against him in virtually all of the instances, unless you're using somebody like Kingpin or Crossbones or somebody else. Because, unless you get rid of those debuffs, you will be doing a lot less damage. And besides that, then it's not like Null does not present challenges in the fight. One of the most underestimated things for Null on defense is the fact that every 10 hits in the opponent's combo meter inflict an indefinite darkness passive, lowering their combat power rate by 15%. So if you do not finish this guy very quickly, your combat power rate is going to be absolutely destroyed. And a lot of people underestimate that so much. It's very powerful. Obviously, again, fairly good resistance to bleed, poison, degeneration can at times come in handy, both on defense and offense. And then his corruption, if you do allow him to use a level 1, then you need to be very diligent in making sure that it does not get to fully active corruption and your controls reversed, because then it can be a very good time. Some things that do decrease his presence and power on defensive side of the game is the fact that Kingpin and Absorbing Man do completely walk over him, but again, every champion has pretty much perfect counters. Offensively speaking, I do think he is one of the more underestimated champion, because he can serve as a great evade counter because of his access to true accuracy on his symbiote attacks, which is basically his mediums and heavies and most of his special hits. And then he has access to degen, to bleed, and lowering opponent's defense to combat power rate, thus enabling himself to be more aggressive. And if you do have him at Sig 200, he's definitely a very capable offensive champion as well. So putting in at spot number 19. Moving on to spot number 18, I will give it a champion that used to be one of the best defenders, but now we all have learned how to deal with Penny Parker. Now we all have more counters. Galan and Hulkling have completely destroyed the stock of Penny Parker, and at this point, she is quite a situational defender, where you can draft her, you're almost certain opponent is going to get a counter to her, but that is part of the beauty of dual purpose champions, because whenever opponent does, specifically counter Penny, let's say, you can quite easily turn around, flip your Penny on attack, go KO Nick Fury or something else, and then, opponent has to deal with whatever champions he has remaining. And that's kind of the cool thing. And there will be times when obviously opponent does not get a counter or is forced to use the counter on something else, when Penny can function as a very powerful defender. Though I must admit that in most of the more recent metas, she primarily has functioned more often than not as an offensive champion and kind of a little bit of a defensive scare tactic for opponent to force them to draft some of the cosmic champions. Because obviously, again, as we have learned how to deal with Penny, we're using Massacre, we're using Starhand Spider-Man, Mole-Man, Galans, Hulklings, Hercules, so on and so forth. There are plenty of champions that deal with Penny well enough, and people have adapted to her. However, her offensive capabilities, I think, are still kind of underestimated. She's a great counter to a bunch of champions, like she can take Dr. Doom very well, for instance. She can take Absorbing Man very well. She can take it. I think I have done Thing with her as well. It's just that, you do need to be quite comfortable and confident using her. Obviously, amp up the charges. She can easily finish fights in sub 60 seconds, which isn't as impressive in nuke metas, but with the nuke scoring change, I think she could potentially be even more popular champion. So I'm going to be placing her in spot number 18. Moving on to spot number 17, and this could be a personal bias pick, but judging by the amount of matches that this champion has won for me, and judging by the amount of times people tend to ban this guy, I feel no shame including Havoc in my dual purpose list champions, because Havoc is cool AF. And believe you me, Havoc is much better than people realize. Yes, he's not the fastest, even though I have done fights with Havoc in like 50 seconds, something like that. That's not like the fastest time. Typically, they last about 60 seconds because most of the champions are dead with a single level 3. There are times when you don't necessarily need that, but yes, Havoc is very powerful. Part of his power comes from his synergy with Inequity Mastery, and then if opponents are not capable of nuking him down super quickly, then they will take an explosion. It is not as easy to nuke him down super quickly because he does have quite massive energy resistance. He also punishes opponents for critting a lot against him and reduces crit damage. And on top of it, he synergizes, as I mentioned before, with Inequity and also basically prohibits opponents from using bleed-reliant champions. So as a defender, he's not the best, but he's definitely not the worst either. He often does a great job holding in and dealing some damage to the opponent. And then the offensive key obviously comes from him having that massive level 3 access to his feedback damage on heavy attacks and being able to deliver damage over time, and the fact that many of his hits are non-contact, and therefore he's perfect counter against Korg. He's very good against stuff like Atuma, for example, and a whole bunch of other skill champions. And in a pinch, you can use him in a bunch more less than standard matchups. I could done Rintra with Havoc in about 80 seconds. I could done a whole bunch of Dr. Dooms. Use him against Mephisto due to the Incinerate immunity. And he, to me, happened to be just one of those champions that happens to work out, that happens to do the job greatly. And has served me very well. Therefore, I don't think if I had not ranked him up, I would value him as highly. But since I have had a lot of first-hand experience, I cannot absolutely deny how much this champion has done for me personally in Battlegrounds, to a point where obviously my opponents have started to recognize that, and Havoc is one of my most banned champions in my deck in most of the metas. So take it for what you will, but that's where I'm placing him. Moving on to spot number 16, and this is actually a champion why I made it top 20 instead of top 15, because I definitely had to include Warlock. And Warlock is champion that unfortunately Kabam has been kind of doing dirty recently with all of the nuke metas. It really is a shame because Warlock does not shy in a flat out race. If all the champions are being able to use in Battlegrounds, then, and nuke metas are a thing, then there are plenty of counters to Warlock, and he just is not quite fast enough offensively in some of the instances, to a point where there have been these nuke metas that are virtually no nodes, where I actually take him out of the deck because he is a very, very good defender in specific set of circumstances, unless opponents basically have cosmic nuke champions in most cases, because then, he can stall them back by his ability to prevent opponent from critting on special attacks. And obviously Infection can mess with their ability accuracy and does degen to them whenever he activates level 1 or level 2. So Warlock can be a very, very solid defender that people should respect for, unless they have like these nuke cosmic champions. And then on the other hand, offensively, he's one of the most versatile Battlegrounds champions, period. Just isn't one of the fastest ones. Like, you can use him against Rintra, but that will take like 90 seconds, 100 seconds. You can use him against Mephisto, but that also will take a while. Like, you can use him against Kingpin, but it will also take a while. So, Warlock is tremendously valuable for Battlegrounds, without a doubt. But his real value always lie in slightly more complex meta. Like, for instance, when we had the Power Snack meta, Warlock was very, very strong. Why? Because he has one of the best power controls in the game. So it's always kind of worth checking out what meta we're talking about, and this is very, very important why you guys shouldn't follow any list kind of blindly. There will be metas where some of these champions shine more so than others, and Warlock, in my opinion, overall has definitely earned himself a spot on this list because he has been really useful in a ton of instances. But at the same time, you need to be aware that there will be metas where it might not quite be worth putting him in the deck. But there we go. Super versatile, both offensively and defensively. Moving on to spot number 15, I will give that to Bishop. And Bishop obviously is one of the 7-star champions that's very functional on Awaken, therefore he's gotten even more popular as he was before, but Battlegrounds did give this guy a ton of popularity from the very beginning. And the reason for that is because, yeah, he's one of the kind of easier and safer counters to a ton of skilled champions, including Korg and Kingpin. And kind of like the default, like if you think about Korg counters, probably chances are that Bishop is the first that comes to the mind of most of the people, because he does that matchup very, very well and relatively fast. And then obviously he does great against a bunch of other champions. And defensively, he's always a threat. Even if you have a solid counter to him, he can, randomly eke out a victory, because a lot of the fight against Bishop will depend whether you can fully dex or properly dex, mostly dex the level 2 from him. Typically, when you fight against Bishop, you will try to prevent him from throwing level 1, especially if you do not have Incinerate Immune. But even if you have an Incinerate Immune champion, you will want to push opponents to level 2, because dexing level 1 is borderline impossible. I have done it like 4 or 5 times, maybe, ever, but most of the time I just end up getting clipped. And then the level 2, it just can catch you. Now, as time goes by, I do think Bishop has lost a lot of defensive value, because we have discovered things like, Juggernaut does him in sub 30 seconds and so on and so forth. But he still is a champion that, unless you do have one of these appropriate options, will absolutely mess you up. He's one of the champions that you can trap opponents with. For instance, if you only have champions that deal energy damage, they're going to have a terribly bad time. Another thing that gives him a ton of value is the fact that he's like one of the only mutants that you don't really want to use Nimrod against, and therefore, it's kind of like a great safeguard to that champion. And yeah, he has solid uses also offensively. And if we do see any node that increases special attack damage, then my man just absolutely shines. And here we are. Bishop, great unawakened or awakened, and is putting in work consistently. Again, one more of those champions that I don't think works in every meta. If there's an absolute nuke meta, I often do not run the guy. By the way, he's also a quite solid Domino counter, if in a pinch due to his super high energy resistance. I want to point that out. Yeah, my opinion, definitely the Zero champion to be up here. So, who's better than that? Well, let's move on to spot number 14, and this is going to go to Longshot. Longshot has also been one of those champions that has regained his reputation, possibly even higher standards than he ever had due to Battlegrounds. And Longshot turns out to be a very tricky defender to deal with in a lot of circumstances, partially because he's up to 60% chance to nullify, and then steal opponents' unstoppable or unblockable buffs, which can turn him into a very ferocious defender. Not to mention, if Kabam is spamming these, unblockable nodes where either you or opponent has to go unblockable, that's like a worst case scenario against Longshot, because either Longshot is going to go unstoppable and you have to deal with it, or you will go unstoppable and Longshot will potentially nullify that, fill his Mystic Dispersion, and also go unstoppable. So there are a lot of lose-lose situations against Longshot. And obviously, because of his karma and the way he gains extra amount of power, in combination with him being a Mystic champion, being fed by Mystic Dispersion, often can make the fight seem like you're just endlessly baiting out special attacks, and you absolutely have to keep his karmas under control, which is not an easy job if, you can't stun the champion freely. And on the flip side, dropped my pen. On the flip side, he is one of the fastest Mystic specialty nukes. He's relatively solid in a generic matchup. He's perfectly capable of finishing fights in about 60 to 70 seconds against a random opponent, even if they do not have many buffs. But he's absolutely capable of nuking champions down in 30 to 40 seconds if they do have plenty of buffs, making him one of the possible fastest Mystic champions alongside Tigra and Juggernaut. So I do think he absolutely deserves to be on this list, and people do underestimate this guy's defender a lot. I did, And then in one of the metas, I lost like 4-5 matches in a row because of Longshot. Like the score was like 1-1, but 4 or 5 matches in a row, I lost one round whenever Longshot was placed on defense. And yeah, I had to admit that I needed to legitimately think of Longshot as a powerful defender, add a proper defender in my deck for him, proper counter in my deck for him, in order to be able to face him. Because in nuke metas, fine. If you get like a good science option against him, fine. But even then, things can go wrong. He's one of those very slippery, tricky guys. I hate that Prince Charming. Alright, spot number 13. Spot number 13 is definitely going to go to Future Ant-Man. And again, this is one of those champions that's very new in the game, so it's quite hard to place him, but there is absolutely no doubt that Future Ant-Man is a tremendously awesome offensive champion that does handle vast majority of the mutant matchups, but not just that, because you can use him against stuff like Thing, you can use him in a ton of different instances, completely preventing opponents from throwing special attacks if that is what you intend. And then obviously he can be an annoying defender by not only glancing and preventing you from critting and all that other stuff, but also by messing with your power, because whenever his power detonations do expire and he places these disintegrations on you, you end up losing power. Whenever you end up blocking any of his special hits, you can get disorientation placed on you and you end up losing power. If you have power detonation passive on you, then and he connects a hit on your block, then you take a ton of block damage. And ultimately also the fact that he does have this 10% damage maximum, where a lot of champions that do rely on like 1 or 2 massive hits will not be able to nuke him down. That would typically include champions like Shocker or Mantis or whoever else has like these really, really strong max, special attacks on a single or 2 hits, will not be able to do much damage to him. And yeah, Future Ant-Man has been putting in work both offensively and defensively, even in these nuke metas. And I think with harder node combinations, he's going to become even more powerful. So will be very interesting to see what the future holds for this champion. Moving on, spot number 12. Da-da-da-dum, goes to America Chavez. America Chavez is a champion that got a tune-up, started raising in popularity, got released as a 7-star, and absolutely shot above the expectations, and is probably my favorite or second favorite 7-star champion that I personally currently own as well, but I have seen a ton of rank 2 7-star America Chavez is running around, and there's a very, very, very good reason for it. Because she does hit much harder than people realize, even in matchups where opponents do not have buffs, to a point where you can, casually take down Nick Fury in about 50 seconds, I would say, in like an average meta, 50, 60 seconds for sure. Against Nick Fury, it's not bad at all. And then if opponents do have any meaningful amount of buffs, she just hits insanely hard. On top of it, America Chavez probably has one of the most awful dog crappy AIs, where she will often refuse to do anything and start spamming heavy attacks. I think I had a match against BB where he literally came to my stream after the match and said that America Chavez threw like 7 heavy attacks at the beginning of the fight for no goddamn reason. And that's the thing with America Chavez. You can have a very, very good fight against her, and then she is not, too tricky to deal with. But if she even drops a single heavy attack, the level of difficulty in the fight against her increases exponentially. And therefore, that's also kind of like a secret for America Chavez on defense, because any meta where she can't be parry stunned freely, or you do need to try to reparry or something like that against masochism or stun immunity or whatever else, she's going to be crazy. She's going to be crazy because she loves throwing heavy attacks, and if you're going to give her a reason to, she's not going to go for a reparry. She's probably going to go for a heavy attack. And then people are very, very unhappy. And moving on, spot number 13. And I think some people will think that I underestimate this champion. But listen up. Listen up. That's Absorbing Man. And the reason about Absorbing Man is because he is not as tough of a defender as people think. He really, really isn't. you can keep him out of his forms, which is quite easy, especially if you can make him alternate the matchups, switch off his healing. You can kind of take him with a crap ton of champions. Virtually every science champion walks all over this guy without any trouble, and his medium health pool does make him quite easy to deal with. It did seem much harder initially, but the more you play, the more you realize that it's not that bad. Yeah, obviously things can go wrong and you can flip or something can happen, but he's nowhere near as hard defender as the top Mystic, in my opinion. And offensively, I love the fact that he has a ton of versatility, and his resistances does allow him to take many tricky matchups like Korgs, like Killmongers. You know, you can do Doctor Doom with him, you can do Nimrods with him, so on and so forth. Warlocks. That's cool. But unless there are armor breaks involved or a ton of expiring buffs, he's also not necessarily the fastest. Like in a generic fight, an average fight with Absorbing Man, unless it is a like very good matchup for him, will probably be close to 60 seconds, which currently has not been, quick enough for most of these nuke metas. So I do have a rank 4 C200 Absorbing Man, and I do use him plenty, but recently I discovered that I took him out of my deck under, several metas, because in nuke metas he just didn't stall people long enough or didn't kill champs fast enough. I do think that his value raises tremendously if there are things that slow the matchups down. I do think if there's additional levels of complexity introduced to the fight, he becomes a lot more valuable. Like how relatively high expectations for him on the new meta, for instance, where he will periodically go unstoppable on defense, which will be something, that makes it harder to fight against him. And obviously, offensively, he will have an extra buff, feeding him Mystic Dispersion, allowing you to spam more special attacks, allowing you to get more Omnimorph charges, allowing you to inflict the vulnerabilities, and so on and so forth. So, I do think that meta is extremely important to Absorbing Man. I absolutely love Absorbing Man as a champion, but in the more recent Battlegrounds environment, he hasn't been doing quite as well for me. But then again, Absorbing Man is a champion that highly depends on the skill level as you play, and perhaps I'm just not good enough for him. But ultimately, often if I see a rank 5 Absorbing Man, I will kind of leave him be. I will prioritize other bans, or there are times when I don't run him in my deck as well in more recent metas, or I absolutely have zero inclination to ban this guy in most of the metas, even as rank 4 or rank 5 champion. But some of the metas, though, it can be very, very tricky to deal with and much more powerful. So again, it really does depend on the meta. But he's definitely nowhere near as tough on defense as he used to be when he initially came out, because we got used to him. Right, moving on to spot number 10, and spot number 10 is one of those placements that I did not really want to place as low, because this is a champion that I could rank in a top 10 attackers list as well. Spot number 10, I'm going to give it a Scorpion. And here is a very direct explanation on Scorpion. Scorpion is the second best science champion offensively in Battlegrounds, for sure. And he could easily make into top 10 BG attackers list. But in this case, I also value him as a defender. He is not the toughest defender. If opponent does have an evade counter or poison immune, that will typically nuke him down. But I cannot deny that I have won a ton of matchups with Scorpion on defense as well. And that's kind of like one of the cool things about him, where you can draft Scorpion relatively early. Your opponents will be hesitant to draft big fat Mystic champions, and then, it's quite possible for you to drop Scorpion in defense, and unless they have like an appropriate skill champion or something like a Hulkling, there's a good chance that they will eat a thing to the face. And he definitely has saved me a lot on defense as well. He's also more so an attacker than defender, I would say, because of how capable he is on attack. And ultimately, I do think that he is one of the most invaluable champions for Battlegrounds. But that said, I think the same goes for pretty much everybody on this list from this point forward. And that said, moving on to spot number 9, and I am going to give that to Nimrod. And Nimrod is a fairly unique case. He's definitely an MVP must-have in virtually all of the metas, because he completely shuts down the mutant class and is, the best domino counter period in the game. So he pretty much has to exist in a Battlegrounds deck. What do people underestimate about Nimrod is that he takes a ton of other random champions in about 60 seconds if he's Sig 200. Because there is a very specific rotation where you basically want to start the fight with parry, medium, medium, parry, medium, medium, parry, medium, light, medium, something like that. And then parry, start going into your full combo and activate your special attack as you are shifting from one phase to another. Thus, you gain the benefits of both Blitz and Blitz and Titan protocol without entering Eradicate protocol, but you have the Energize, you have the energy vulnerability on the opponent. Then you build up to the level 2 as quickly as you can. You drop that level 2, entering Eradicate protocol, and you will pretty much finish the fight against most opponents whilst you still have that energy vulnerability active. It's super important if you know that rotation, know how to use Nimrod properly in more random matchups. You don't need to rely on prowess effects and regions, kind of like get amazing results out of him. And that said, he also is a very solid defender, and he does stop several, armor break based cosmic champions, for instance, like CGR can take him, but CGR will have to go for level 3, so it's not going to be super fast. And he's quite chunky, and especially in a lot of metas, due to his cowardice, opponent's special attack damage, gets significantly dwindled, or due to his power drain, opponents, can't use as many special attacks. And due to his energize and unstoppable, he's very good at stalling for quite a lot of time. So he's definitely also a solid defender in plenty of the metas. So ultimately, I do think that Nimrod is, an MVP must-have for Battlegrounds, as I do for virtually every champion in this list, to be honest. Right, moving on. Spot number 8 is going to go to a Cosmic Boy, which is going to be... Where is it? Where is it? My eyes are failing. Here you go. Galan. And Galan is, again, one more of those champions that people primarily look as an attacker, but he is much more than that, especially, yet again, in some of these metas. Like, in a generic situation, yeah, if you can nuke down Galan, you will be fine. But if there's anything slowing you down, then you either need to be able to deal with that harvest or have some sort of increase in the power gain, or you will take harvest to your face. And the cool thing about Galan, obviously, is versatility, because his harvest damage works against just about everybody in the game, with the exception of future Ant-Man. And with that, again, he's not the most capable champion in the nuke metas, because, on typical, you will take around 50 to 60 seconds to nuke an average champion with your Galan. But in any more complex metas, he always turns out to be one of the MVPs. On top of it, he often is one of the only cosmic champions that will work under specific conditions due to his immunity to power manipulation and due to his immunity to nullify, which is absolutely massive for Galan. However, a good example on his defensive prowess will come in the new Battlegrounds meta, in both of them. Because every 9 seconds, the defender gains an unstoppable buff for 3 seconds, means that Galan will be gaining planetary mass from this. Therefore, it is going to be harder to fight against him, and you will need that dedicated counter with the, neutralize or something like that, because this will count towards his planetary mass, and, with first level 1, he's going to gain 40 planetary mass. He's probably going to gain this unstoppable, so that's going to make it 50. With second level 1, he's going to gain another 40 planetary mass. And this unstoppable is going to make it 100. And he's going to enter harvest. So you're going to need to be very, very quick and be very effective in dealing with him. Similar to this personal space regeneration, every regen buff that he's going to get will count for his planetary mass. And that means if you're aggressive against Galan, he'll just randomly enter harvest as you're attacking him. So yeah, keep that in mind, and a lot of people underestimate that. I have underestimated that myself, and I have definitely taken plenty of L's against Galan, even though I fully admit that he's primarily an attacker. But yeah, Galan can be quite scary. Right. Moving on. In spot number 7, I will place one of the best defensive champions, specifically defensive champions, and that is Domino. And Domino is kind of like obviously hit or miss on defense, because if opponent does not have a counter to Domino that's proper, you basically have a guaranteed round. Domino is one of the match deciding champions. If opponent drafts a late Domino and you don't have a counter, you're kind of screwed. Almost certainly gonna lose that. But on the flip side, if you draft a Domino and then opponent gets like a Nimrod or something, you know, there's no way you can drop a Domino on defense, because unlike a lot of other champions that do get countered by a ton of things, Domino doesn't have massive health pool or some damage reduction mechanics, and she's gonna go down fast. That said, the cool thing about that is you can use Domino on attack relatively easily, because Domino does do well with an asterisk, and here is kind of like the problem of that. So you draft a Domino, opponent gets a Nimrod, you can use Domino on attack. Even if it's a good matchup, you're not 100% sure how you're gonna do. Domino is a definition of, Jesus take the wheel. Stars align, you can nuke down somebody with a level 2. Stars don't align, you're gonna need 3 level 2s. That is how different her damage output can be. Whether you go lucky, whether you get a bleed, whether that bleed is critical bleed, whether the special attacks crit, all that stuff is really varied. But that still said, I do always still feel comfortable, taking Domino against Nick Fury. Sometimes you're going to finish fight in 60 seconds, sometimes you're going to finish fight in 90 seconds. Domino strangely does quite well against Rintra. Often have done Rintra relatively fast in like 70 seconds with Domino. Now you can take Korg with Domino if need be, and so forth. So there are many of tricky champions that you can use Domino against, just that you don't ever really know how you're going to do. But with the power on defense that she has, she also is a staple MVP must-have Battlegrounds champion. There's just no question about it. The force to reckon with. Alright, let's move on to spot number 6, and this is going to be kind of like a painful, I suppose, admission, because when it comes to dual purpose aspect of these champions, I do think that Spot is ahead of Scorpion in Battlegrounds. More specific, I think Scorpion is the better attacker. Slightly. I do think Scorpion is slightly the better attacker. More versatile, anyways. But I do think Spot is the better defender. Because against Spot, you have less champions that do counter him well. It's easier to tank damage against Spot. It is kind of like an RNG Fiesta fight as well. And a lot of top skilled champions don't do that well against Spot also. Because, ability shrug of debuffs will not necessarily save you against Spot. He still can go untouchable. You're really looking for that ability accuracy reduction in most cases, or disorient. And Spot at the moment is quite a dangerous Battlegrounds defender in his own right. As in, I think a lot of people would be running Spot even if he had very little offensive viability. And then offensively speaking, he is one of the fastest science nukes. I do think Scorpion is better champion overall for the rest of the game, and I do think that Scorpion is better attacker slightly in Battlegrounds. I do, again, think Spot is quite noticeably better defender, though. And yeah, that's about it. He is one of the faster science champions. Take care of, most of the mystics, but also a ton of random matchups like, Iron Man Infinity Wars or what have you, people dropping on defense these days, be those, tech champs or and so forth. So maybe slightly too high. But I, at the same time, think that virtually every single champion in top 10 pretty much a must-have champion for serious BG players. Alright, let's move on to the spot number 5. And in spot number 5, we need to talk about Dr. Doom. Because Dr. Doom, again, I do think he kind of suffers slightly if Kabam just drops flat-out nuke metas everywhere. But there's just no question to still point out how powerful this guy is. Because he is always a notable defender that does force people to find very exact counters to him. He's also one of those champions where kind of like with Bishop, you don't really want to let him use level 1s because that complicates the fights, and then if you push him to level 2s, he can clip you, and that can end fights badly. Obviously, his ability to basically shut off critical hits for most champions can make him super tanky. And then offensively, he's one of the safest champions that will take an average opponent in about 60 to 70 seconds. He's a super useful core counter as well. Obviously, great against a whole bunch of cosmic champions. Not the fastest Mystic on offense, again, needs to be pointed out, but one of the safest, though. Because when you take fights with Dr. Doom, it's very rarely that you dip below 90% health, which is quite awesome, and which is going to be more important with a new scoring system. Something to keep in mind. And now let's get to the top 4. And top 4 champions, again, I just don't think I need to kind of explain myself too much with these top champions. And that's going to be Hercules. Hercules is a ramp-up champion that somehow does amazing in Battlegrounds. He's one of these staple cosmic offensive champions. And obviously we all know that we use Herc against pretty much anything in BGs. You can use Herc against Domino to a relatively good degree. You can use him against Org if you're skilled enough, and all of the tech class champions, and he has ability to bypass miss, going stun immune. So he's very, very versatile Battlegrounds attacker, no questions asked, with a very high damage output. But people really do underestimate him defensively, especially in these nuke metas. And what makes him solid on defense is basically three simple, straightforward mechanics. Number one is the fact that he goes stun immune. As soon as you knock him down, he's going to go stun immune, and you will have to reparry, and that is going to present complications. Parry heavy playstyle champions, will be kind of slowed down against him, and that often causes people to make some mistakes because of his stun immunity. Number 2 is his Infuriate mechanic, because his Infuriate is active for a relatively large amount of time in the fight, and making your abilities fail 60% of the time, which is quite crazy because, a lot of champions, you really need to precisely time your offense against Hercules, but if you don't, you get punished for it severely. For instance, you can drop your level 2 with Hulkling, and, you're not going to get a Fury buff. You can drop your Harvest with Galan, and, nothing's going to happen. So that Infuriate definitely messes up people, without doubt. And then lastly, perhaps most importantly, he also stalls with his Immortality. And Immortality is 9 seconds at max sig on its base, which is relatively long amount of time. But he extends it by whenever he's dashing at you, whenever he's throwing a special attack, that Immortality is paused. And the fact that he's unblockable during the Immortality always presents this relatively high stress scenario where, slight mistake can cost you very dearly. And especially in nuke metas, Hercules is a very, very, very respectable defender. Right, then top 3. In the third spot, we're going to go back to Mystic class, and we're going to give that to Rintra flat out. Now, Rintra is, again, primarily a defender, I would say, but he is extremely capable offensively, and that duality of the champion is what makes him as attractive overall for Battlegrounds, because he is one of the best defensive champions for this entire Battlegrounds thing, but he also is one of the neutralized champions on offense who's capable of finishing fights in 60 seconds if you do not get particularly lucky, or 30 seconds if you do get lucky and level 2 crits. And the neutralize is becoming more and more important mechanic in the game overall, because we are getting introduced with more and more champions that are either nullify immune or that, gain passive effects if their stuff is nullified, and so on and so forth. And neutralize just works as a great ability that bypasses a ton of that new stuff and new other abilities. And Rintra is really, really good at it. Given the fact, how cosmic champions are typically built, there are virtually no cosmic champions that Rintra would not be great against and work well as an attacker. Therefore, I did not want to put Rintra in the box of being just a defender. He absolutely is not. I personally use Rintra ton on attack, especially in some of the more complex metas as well. In the nuke metas, it's just hard to find. What's the best way to say? Hard to find justification of using one of your best defenders offensively, but in more complex metas, it often works out where, again, as I have mentioned before, you draft a Rintra, you force opponent into drafting like a Torch or a Scorpion, then you stop drafting, Mystic champions, and then you turn around and nuke opponents, Cosmic champion with your Rintra, and you're taking the lead in the match. And Rintra is very good champion at doing that. And then what are the best two champions? Well, here we go, Hulkling. Oops, that's not. No. Here we go, Hulkling. Here we go. Hulkling is one of the best Battlegrounds offensive champion, hands down. And the reason for it is because he's so simple. Get to level 2, smack it, things die. He doesn't have a particularly high reliance on crits because of the massive furies. He does plenty of damage without critting. So opponents with crit resistance don't really bother him. On top of it all, he doesn't rely on any damage or time effects, so no immunities or resistances really are a problem for Hulkling. On top of it all, he himself has plenty of immunities and stuff like that. He has ability to do a ton of damage through block and nuke down many of the most important defenders. To the point wherever you do use Hulkling on offense, I rarely see a longer fight than 50 to 60 seconds with Hulkling as an attacker. But as a defender, he obviously has a weakness to Mystic champions, unquestionably, just like every other Cosmic defender, There's just the fact, if opponent has a solid Mystic attacker, Hulkling is going to go down very fast to pretty much anybody else. But the trick is if they don't, because it can be super annoying to fight Hulkling because of his regen, because of his indestructible, because of the fact that you can't really parry against him, because you're going to end up taking a ton of block damage. If you miscount the charges, he is going to go unblockable, can punish you for that. And his increased power gain can stall for a lot of time if he gets into like a level 1 spamming loop. And it's very hard to push him to level 2 because you can't really block against the guy. So obviously there are counters to everything, but Hulkling has been performing in Battlegrounds to the highest level, no questions asked. I think specifically if you're talking Battlegrounds, the best Cosmic champion for Battlegrounds. And the top spot, well, there's just one champion that deserves it. Kingpin. Fat and bald, but on top of the world. And yeah, I think overall, as I have talked before about Kingpin in his skill ranking video, he's a champion that in Battlegrounds has worked for literally every single meta. We thought that there will be meta where Kingpin doesn't work, which was the cold turkey meta where they literally added, a node that punishes you shrugging off debuffs. But by the halfway weak point, I still ended up running Kingpin, and he still did plenty fine as a defender and plenty fine as an attacker. So I think he's like pretty much the only champion that has worked like for every single meta, including the debuff shrug off one. Because the thing about Kingpin is he's not the fastest champion unless there are some debuffs involved. If there are some extra debuffs involved, he's one of the fastest nukes. Like, put a Null on defense against Kingpin and you're going to see a good time. But even on his own, he's plenty fast in most cases, and he's also one of the most versatile attackers. Like, there are very, very few champions that you can't enter a fight using Kingpin. Like, yeah, there are like very few champions, like Toad or, Domino maybe. But most Mystic champions you can use Kingpin against. Most Cosmic champions you can use Kingpin against. Most Tech champions you can use Kingpin against, so on and so forth. He's incredibly versatile. And that obviously comes due to his debuff shrug, increased combat power rate, his opponent's defensive ability accuracy reduction, and attack reduction on his level 1s, his access to unstoppable, all that other good stuff. He just works. And he's much, much tougher defender than most people give him credit for due to his increase in combat power rate. So if your offensive champion relies on debuffs, you can forget about it. They're going to take forever. Like, you're never going to win a fight with like Scorpion or pretty much any or most of the science champions against Kingpin. And then, even if you do have like a solid option, Kingpin will still take time to go down because, well, number one, he's a chunky boy. Number two, he has increased combat power rate. And that means you need to bait out many more special attacks. And in case of Kingpin, with almost all of the champions, you want to avoid Kingpin from using level 2, which means that after every combo or every 2 combos, you want to be dancing around the screen baiting a level 1 out. So yes, Kingpin is incredibly capable as a defender. And there we go. I do think that Kingpin is the best dual-purpose champion for Battlegrounds. I think every single champion in top 10, you can argue about changing the positions for. Again, it's kind of like your preference, depends on metas, all that other stuff. I think literally, everybody in top 10 is a must-have. Maybe not for every meta, but almost every meta. I do think that, you can make some changes in the bottom 10 as well, but when it comes to the top 10, I don't, you can place Domino at 5th, or you can place Scorpion at 5th. I don't think it really matters that much. I think every single one of the top 10 champions is pretty much a must-have for, dedicated Battlegrounds player. You will not go wrong with those champions, is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, there we go. 50 minutes. Jesus Christ. I could have made it into an hour-long video, but I won't because I like you. Okay, so just a quick reminder. Still doing the giveaway. Do not forget to check it out. And that will be it for now. I'll catch you guys later. Bye. Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information